Hello, my name is Nicolas betancourt, and this is my presentation on the Code of Ethics for Engineers. Now, before we go into what the Code of Ethics for Engineers is, we have to talk about the NSPE, or the National Society of Professional Engineers. Now, the National Society of Professional Engineers is an organization that was created in 1934 with a specific goal in mind. What that goal is that we need to protect the public and the engineers themselves from the practice of unlawful parties or parties that are not abiding by the laws. And the NSP itself is just made up of engineers, professional engineers from different disciplines inside of engineering, and they all came together to basically set down the rules for how engineers should operate in the future. Now, the Code of Ethics itself starts by explaining how engineering and engineers are a very important profession. In our modern world, everyone is involved with modern inventions, and all of those come from engineering. And in some cases, life depends on these inventions, or rather, if these inventions fail, we could get loss of life. So this is why engineers should be held to a very high moral standard. And this is basically what the whole code stands on. And it says that engineers should prioritize the safety of the public over anything else in their morality. So, the specific code that I'm going to be talking about is the Rules of Practice, or the first code in the Rules of Practice. And it just bases itself on how the public is a top priority for engineers, right? So the health, safety, and welfare of the public are paramount. So engineers should focus on this over anything else, over profit, over what their client is talking about, over what authorities would be talking about, right? So the involvement of parties other than the ones directly involved is up to the judgment of engineers. So again, engineers have full control over who they involve in the project other than their client and the people that should be directly involved in it. So if they feel that their client is not doing something that should be required, it's up to their judgment whether they involve someone else, the local authorities or someone that could rein them in. So, going deeper into the engineer's judgment, there's some standards that should be met, right? Standards that have been agreed upon by everyone in the engineering community, and if they're not met, they should act. This is basically what the consensus is. So the engineer's judgment should be respected. It's an unspoken rule. Basically, everyone should trust the expert is where we're going off here. In cases where it's overridden, so overridden means by some natural circumstance or something that's not under anyone's control. If the engineer's judgment isn't the primary force driving something, then the engineer has to exercise his judgment to go get help or involve other parties that could help with the situation. So one of the important points of the first code is the promise of confidentiality. What that means is engineers basically agree when going into a business relation to not divulge information about the project or the client or anything like that to other parties, but most importantly to parties that are suspected of being fraudulent or unlawful. Also, as we said before, the contact with public authorities or people not directly involved in the project should be reserved for when the engineer's judgment goes into effect and when the engineer is overridden, when the engineer doesn't have control of the situation anymore. Those are the situations where the promise of confidentiality could be bypassed. Coming to a close of the presentation, we could say that integrity is above all. That could be a summary of the whole idea, right? So associations with parties suspected of being fraudulent are forbidden. This goes without saying. Engineers should not associate with someone that's suspected of being unlawful out of their own free will. And well, as I just said, unlawful practice of any kind are forbidden by the code. This should go by without speaking, without talking about it. But since it's set in the code, it's more of a literal rule